Hi, my name is Suzanne Price, and I am the creator of the app called My Panic Coach. And in this video, I'm going to share a little bit about my story and my experience of how I came to suffer with anxiety and panic attacks and how I overcame it. This was not something that I had suffered with when I was younger. It actually seemed to come on out of the blue. Although, to be honest with you, I had been experiencing symptoms of stress for a long time. I just didn't know that they were symptoms of stress. I'd had difficulty sleeping for months, possibly years, prior to this happening. I just kind of accepted it as part of the way I lived, or just how I slept, I guess I should say. I'd also been experiencing a lot of tension and stiffness in my neck, my back, and my shoulders. And I had become so stiff on my left side, I'd actually gone to a doctor because I thought I was only breathing through the one lung. That's how stiff I was. I was basically told to go to physiotherapy, and I think it was assumed that I wasn't sleeping because I was, so uncomfortable, and that I was probably experiencing this tension because of the way I was sleeping. Anyways, I did go to physio for a little bit. It didn't actually give me much relief, and this continued for a while. I'm not sure how long for, but then I started to experience dizzy spells and this sense of bewilderment and sort of that feeling of being unreal or dissociated and disconnected. And I was experiencing this more while I was at work, so I had started to wonder if I was actually allergic to something in my workplace. Then one day I went into work and I had a massive panic attack, and it just kind of came on out of the blue, and it was the most terrifying experience I'd ever had. And when it was over, I left work right away, and I had another massive panic attack when I was driving home, and I had to stop at an intersection, which I think is very common, and this is how driving fears and phobias often come about. Anyways, when I got home, I thought, okay, I'll just sit down and relax, and it's probably going to subside, but I just had this horrible feeling of numbness and being off balance, and every time I went to get up, I would have to hold on to something. I just felt so bewildered and unreal, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to go to a doctor or just wait and see if this was going to sort of clear up by itself. But by the evening, I was starting to think that it was getting worse, and I went to a doctor hoping that I would have find out what it was and be able to put this to rest. Unfortunately, that doctor's visit turned out to be a bit of a disaster in my opinion, because after sitting there and explaining everything that had happened, all the feelings that I was having, telling him about the panic attack that I'd had, he wrote me out a prescription, and as he handed it to me, he just said, "You're pregnant." And that was it. He walked out, and I just left. In a way, I was a little bit relieved that I hadn't been told that I was suffering with something so out of the ordinary. But at the same time, I knew that I wasn't pregnant, and that this kind of made me even more concerned. The next day, I went back to work, and I felt awful. As soon as I walked in, I felt awful, and I felt that this has definitely got something to do with me being in work. So I left, and I decided to go and ask another doctor about what was going on. And I went to see another doctor. I explained everything, and she just said, "You're stressed." I asked her how this could be true, what could have possibly been causing me to be so stressed, and also how come if I was stressed I was feeling all of these really awful physical feelings and sensations right throughout my body. She really didn't answer me. Again, I wanted to know why this had happened, what were all the symptoms caused by. When was it going to stop? How long was it going to last for? What did I have to do to overcome it? And with no further explanation, she just handed me another prescription and pushed me out the door. She did say to take a few days off work, which I did, and I realized the thought of going back was making me feel even worse. So I decided to quit my job. I would give myself 2 weeks to get better and go and find another job, and it was going to be, in my mind, that simple. Little did I know that this was the beginning of a 10-year ordeal. At the end of that 2 weeks, looking back on that very first panic attack and my decision to quit my job, I realized my entire life had suddenly changed. I'd had to quit my job because I just couldn't function at work. I was turning down all sorts of social invitations and making excuses because I didn't know what to tell people or how to explain what I was going through. I couldn't drive, and I couldn't even go outside to the front door to get the mail from the mailbox right outside the front door without having another massive panic attack or literally becoming paralyzed by fear. It was the most incredible experience, and no matter what I did, I just couldn't seem to overcome it. I did see a few more doctors, and the same thing happened. I just walked out with another prescription and no explanation, and I wasn't getting any answers to the questions I was asking. So I decided to take matters into my own hands, and I went to the UBC bookstore and I purchased every book I could find on the subject. And I started to read it and do all the diagnostic tests, and it kind of gave me a little bit of insight. And basically, the recommendations from the books was to either go on medication or to go to therapy. To cut a long story short, I did see a few more doctors. I did go to several therapists. I was, for the most part, being told this was just part of who I was and I should just accept it, that I should just go out and do whatever it was that I liked to do, and one day the symptoms would subside. And none of this made any sense, and I kept saying, how can it be part of who I am? I never had it before, and I don't want it now. I wanted to know why this had happened, and nobody was helping me figure that out. And it just seemed to be getting worse and worse because there seemed to be no end in sight. At some point, though, I did start to realize that this was a mind-body thing that was going on with me. It wasn't all in the head. It wasn't all about what I was thinking. And in saying it's a mind-body thing, it's like, yes, maybe what you think has an effect in how you feel in your body, but I had never experienced anything to this intensity before. But what happened was, I also started to realize that there were many components to what was going on. Again, it wasn't just about the way I was thinking. And so I decided to look into mind-body therapies. And so in my research, I came across a few therapies that I really, really liked. The first one that I actually decided to try out and that I took the full training in was a therapy called One Brain Learning Awareness, and it's often used for people who suffer with learning disabilities. And although it really didn't do much for me with regards to the stress and anxiety and panic attacks, it was a really good learning experience for me to learn about the mind-body connection, the energy system in the body, how stress can affect the energy system in the body, and how it can create all of these stressful symptoms and sensations. From there, the next thing that I decided to enroll in was NLP. And again, I found it to be absolutely amazing. Although at the time, I really couldn't see how it was going to help me with these really, really intense feelings and sensations in my body. Although I did feel that I had a little bit of an upper hand on everybody else there, because while people would end up going through these programs and say, oh my God, that was amazing, but how do I apply it to my life or to my client's life? I was actually looking for ways to combat these different aspects of the stress, and I could see how different exercises or different modalities could be applied to the different aspects, and I started to experiment with these different therapies that I was working with and training in. I then came across thought field therapy, which is the tapping, and if I had to say that I had a favorite, it would have to be that. When I went for my first session, I thought it was the most ridiculous thing I'd ever done in my life, and I thought there's no way it's going to work. But I got relief from the physical symptoms and sensations from that very first session. In saying that, I personally am not going to say to anybody that it is enough as a stand alone. I know a lot of people actually promote that idea that you just do 1 or 2 sessions with thought field therapy or EFT or tapping and it will eliminate, and I would not say that. I do not believe that it's true, because we also start to develop some very, very strong negative beliefs about ourselves when we suffer with something like anxiety, panic attacks, burnout, and depression, because we also put so many limitations on ourselves during that time, and we take on this whole new identity. So at the end of the day, you kind of need to be working with a whole slew of different modalities and exercises and practices, and really it's a very holistic approach as well to lifestyle management. I always say, forget about stress management. You need to learn to manage your life so that the stress can better manage itself. In saying that, I believe that anxiety, panic attacks, burnout, and agoraphobia is a whole different kettle of fish, and it does need a lot more work, and you do need to go at it from different angles to be able to completely overcome such debilitating symptoms and sensations in your body. So while I found some amazing tools to work with, and I started to experiment by applying different exercises from the different modalities to the different aspects of the stress, to the stress and anxiety and panic attacks and agoraphobia, it was still a very long process. I ended up suffering with this for 10 years. And although I started to chip away at it a little bit at a time, there was still, prior to me finding these therapies and going through that experimentation and really, really working on this, I actually suffered with this for years. And there was many times when I was housebound. Couldn't leave the house, couldn't even go outside my front door. That I had chronic anxiety even when I was home. I had panic attacks for years. I was so determined on so many occasions to go out, and I would psych myself up, and couldn't get out. Or I would go for a walk and maybe make it for half a block, and then I would turn around and I would become so overwhelmed and paralyzed by the fear that I felt that I don't know how I made it home on many occasions. One of my saving graces was definitely I got a rescue dog, and he was just an angel. I got him from a rescue center, and he was just having him there with me and knowing that I had to take him out, even if it meant going for half a block or to be able to walk up the back lane 10 times during the day just to get out. He was definitely very instrumental in helping me overcome this. But for anybody who's never suffered with anything like this, you couldn't possibly imagine what it feels like, how debilitating it is, how it can take so much control over every aspect of your life. And there were many times when I never thought that I would ever work outside the home again. And I had pretty much, there were times when I resigned myself to that idea. And then there were times when I did start to make progress, and then all of a sudden something would happen, and out of the blue I'd have another panic attack, and I would feel so doomed and so disheartened because it didn't make sense. And no, I wasn't thinking, oh, I'm going to have a panic attack, or oh, this, or any such thing. It's more of though it was just, it was something that a vehicle could go back and you would feel, because you become so sensitive to everything, and it could be that feeling of the trembling or vibration in the ground that could set it off. And that was another really crazy thing for me, was that if anything replicated one of the symptoms of a panic attack, it was enough to set another panic attack off. For instance, I remember one day I'm sitting in the house just watching TV, feeling somewhat relaxed, and it was cloudy outside and the sun broke through a cloud. And as it came into the living room and you just felt the heat, that temperature change, that feeling of temperature change was enough to just send me into another massive panic attack. So it was very, very, very challenging. But I did persevere, and I started to really chip away at this until I just completely overcame this entire thing. And I got to the point where there would be many times when I had said, okay, if I could just walk one block, I'll be happy. And I felt like I was making a deal with the devil, and I had reached this point where I thought I am no longer willing to get my old life back and be the person I was, which was pretty confident. I used to do public speaking and teaching and all sorts of things. I decided I was no longer willing to put up with that anymore, but now I wanted to be unstoppable. And that was my goal. That became my goal. And I just had to keep trying until I eventually overcome it. So I absolutely understand what it feels like to suffer with anxiety and panic attacks and agoraphobia and depression, and it is unbelievably awful. But I also truly believe that if I was able to overcome it, I think that you can overcome it as well. I think it's possible for anyone to overcome it. You just have to take a very, very proactive approach. Anyways, here we are, it's 2016, and it's actually been about 14 years since I suffered with anxiety and panic attacks, and there have been several times in my life, due to different situations, where I've had some really challenging things to deal with, and I have never overcome or disempowered and experienced anxiety and panic attacks again. I now know how to recognize the symptoms and warning signs. I now know how to better manage my stress, manage my life. I now will no longer put up with things that I used to put up with. And a lot of that has come about, with a lot of the training that I've done. I had no intention of ever working in the field of stress and anxiety and panic attacks, but I first realized that there were so many people who are and have been in the situation that I was in, and that have such a difficult time finding help. One of my big passions is to help raise awareness about stress for the purpose of prevention, as in preventing stress from manifesting out of control and into something like anxiety and panic attacks and burnout and agoraphobia. And with that, I decided to write a book and launch a campaign, which was the Stress and Burnout Awareness and Prevention Guide, which is available on Amazon. And the Stress and Burnout Awareness and Prevention campaign, I have since written several other books and developed several programs not only in stress but also personal and professional development, because that is what my passion is, and that is basically, I've always written and taught and coached to some capacity in those fields. And I also wrote the book called Relieve Stress, Anxiety, Burnout, Panic Attacks, and Agoraphobia the same way I did, which basically talks a lot about how I overcame it, and it shares some exercises. And I've also created an online program called Take Control of Panic Attacks the same way I did. But besides just focusing on overcoming anxiety and panic attacks and burnout and depression and agoraphobia, there's also an awful lot to be said about figuring out what's really, really causing the stresses in your life. Very often it's debt, very often it's loneliness, very often it's bad relationships, it's not knowing what we want out of life, and it's dealing with those situations and taking your power back, taking control back over your life, because I truly believe that one of the biggest causes of stress and anxiety and depression is the lack of control that we feel that we have in a part of our lives or in our lives in general. So it's really, as I was saying, a very holistic approach. It's about taking care of yourself, good lifestyle habits, empowering yourself with your life skills, figuring out what you really want in your life, who you want to be, what you want to become, and I'm not necessarily talking about career, and living a very balanced and holistic life. And I also am a huge believer of living a life with full expression, whatever that means to you, and to be very connected as well with your, if possible, family, friends, community, spirituality, with yourself. So it is a very, very holistic approach to living an empowered life. And when you get to that point, you basically, you're trading up. You're trading up. You're giving up that life where you feel that you do not have power and control and choice, to one where you have an abundance of your own personal power and self-control, and you make your own choices and you create your own life. So anyways, that's basically me in a nutshell and my story. It's a very short version. And if you are interested in coaching or knowing about any of my other programs, you can visit my website, SuzannePrice.com, or you can go to the mentalwellnessrevolution.com and sign up for the Worldwide Stress Less Challenge, where you will start to receive regularly, you will receive tips on how to better manage your life so that the stress will manage itself. And I definitely recommend anybody that they really learn more about how to balance their own energy and take control of your life and get well. Okay, so like I say, panic attacks can be beaten, and if you take a very holistic approach, I think you definitely improve your odds of overcoming it much sooner, and also make it much more of a long-lasting, lifelong change. Okay, so take care, and don't forget, panic attacks can be beaten, so be strong, be determined, and be the person you want to be. Okay? Bye.